It's not set in stone. Nothing is really. So I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania called Hazleton, in the northeast part of Hazleton near Wilkes-Barre. You might have heard that, or Scranton. So I was brought up in this small town for the first 7 years of my life, and there was a fairly sizable Jewish community. I grew up in a small development with a lot of young married couples who had young children. And so it was a very warm group of friends that my parents had. I do remember feeling really embraced by all of them and seen in a way that children aren't usually included. And it was just a warm and very caring environment. Though I've never been a particularly observant Jew, meaning I don't go to synagogue, I consider myself a cultural Jew, but my identity is very important to me. Passovers are both serious and joyous. I think that's where I really learned about being a Jew and what it meant to be a Jew in that particular situation where my family was conducting a particular ritual and telling us what they thought was important about Judaism. One was not to ever forget the Holocaust. Another message was that we all needed to try to make the world a better place to expose that kind of cruelty and work against it. So there's an activist strain that runs in most Jewish community and identity, and I certainly got that message. I think I was kind of a quiet activist, and I guess I should define that, which is that I went to marches. I was loud at marches, but I was very shy for a long time, so I was a more quiet behind the scenes person. I got into the arts in undergraduate school. I was always interested in photography. So I wanted to do things. So I took a lot of art classes where I could use my hands and get out in the world and, take photographs and stuff. I went to a kind of experimental art school. It was photography, film, video, media studies. So it was kind of on the cutting edge, more avant-garde. Some of us had been out for much longer, and so they were introducing the ones who weren't to all the lesbian fiction and the gay fiction and the beginnings of the theory. And that was kind of the art world that I was part of. And so we were all pushing the boundaries of the art world, pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in the larger culture. We were all exploring our identities and our genders in different ways and playing with them. But I was pretty consistently comfortable with a certain kind of presentation. If I would really describe myself, I guess I would say androgynous. So when I was first coming out, it was really fun to express the masculine part of my personality and my outward appearance and stuff. And I was into that. And as I got older, I realized I was much more fluid than that, and I wanted to be able to express all the parts of who I am. I remember the first Halloween party I went to where I dressed in drag. So I went to a costume store in the theater district and got an actual mustache. And so it was a very convincing one. And I went to this Halloween party, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I looked like a man. And it was disconcerting. All of a sudden my jaw looked different. And I mean, it was really disconcerting. And so I'm at this party and I can hardly talk because people don't know who I am. I mean, good friends. I was with a whole bunch of good friends. And so people were saying, "Who's that guy over there? Does anybody know who invited him?" So when I was looking for jobs after graduate school, and I wrote a letter as a job application, part of a job application. I had my father read it. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, it's a really good letter, but I'm going to tell you something you're not going to like." He said, "I think you should tone it down a little. You're touting your accomplishments too strongly." I said, "You're right. I don't like that, and I'm not going to listen to you." In my curatorial career, my first job curating was at SUNY Binghamton. The art department was 9 men and 1 woman, the studio art department. I think we had 10 shows, 10 exhibitions, They got to have a one-person show of their work. 9 out of 10 years, it was a man, a white man. Then they got to bring in an artist. That was generally a white painter. And they got to have a student show of all their students. So that left 7 shows. So I decided, well, I needed to do predominantly women and people of color and people who did political work. So none of which they were really thrilled with. When I would apply for jobs, even at really liberal institutions, they would say, why did you only show women? Why did you predominantly show women? And I'd have to say, well, because you've been supporting men for years and years and years, white men artists. So I'm just shaking it up a little bit. What's going on with AIDS? As soon as it hit the queer community and it started to be known that it had to do with sexual practices, especially with men, obviously, it brought out a whole new wave of homophobia, cemented people's biases that they already had. It was pretty horrible time. Personally, I had a few friends who died. I had many acquaintances that I knew or that were in the art world that I knew that I would march with. I'll show you my ACT UP t-shirt, which is very worn out. ACT UP was one of the major political activist groups that grew out of the AIDS crisis almost instantly. And they had great graphics. And the design folks that did the graphics were called Grand Fury. When you marched, we had slogans. Everybody wore the t-shirts. We had posters that were on placards. And it was a very powerful movement, and it made a huge difference. Graphic design has always been, a political form. I worked at SUNY Binghamton as a curator and associate director of the art museum, and I was getting tired of it after 8 years. So I convinced them to give me a sabbatical, and I always wanted to check out San Francisco, like every queer person in the universe. But I just loved the Bay Area. I mean, I fell in love with it instantly. San Francisco was still hopping at that time. There were still women's bars and, Frameline. I'm sure you're familiar with Frameline, which is the oldest queer film festival in the world. The film festival was always in the Castro Theater until recently. And when I first moved out to California and went to my first film festival, it was so exciting because the Castro is a huge theater and it's beautiful and it was filled. So it's like 2,000, maybe 3,000 people. And it's 4 or 5 days of incredible films. But that was really exciting because it was such a positive place to be. The mission was totally different than it is now. And, the Castro was totally different than it is now. And it was really a fun place to be. So that's how I got here. And then when that was done, I just decided that I was going to find a job here. I spent so much time exploring the world and all my interests and all my inclinations, which took me in lots of different directions. And when I finally settled down in San Francisco was when I really started thinking about adopting a child. I was older, like I said, so I was really ready to make that commitment, and I didn't feel like I was giving anything up. I had decided I want to be a mother, and I want to be with this child that is so wonderful. I also felt ready to share myself with a child, and I learned as much from her as I think she learned from me. And we had a good time together. We had a really good time together. She learned to love dogs because we always had dogs around. She loved to have stories read to her. She was great at games and cards, much better than me. She learned to play cards when she was really little, and the games got more complex, and she started winning all the time. Anyway, she was just a delight. I worked at the San Francisco Art Commission, and every time somebody wanted to do a mural in a public space, the Art Commission had to approve the design of it. So there was a mural in the Mission by a group of high school students called Homies, and they designed a mural, and there was one picture of a guy with his fist up wearing a Palestinian, those scarves. And so the mural got painted. there's certain parts of the Jewish community that are more active than in others, and they decided that the image was threatening to them, which I didn't agree with. But I got a call from the mayor's office that said I needed to fix the situation. I put together a group of Palestinians and Jewish folks from the mission, and I met with them and I said, so this was my own little Israeli-Palestinian peace process. I said, nobody's going to be happy when we're done. We're going to come up with a way to change this mural in order to make everybody be able to accept it so it doesn't have to come down. I think in the end, we took the raised fist off. When you work for the city, there are commissions and they're public and people come and testify. And it was actually really moving because there were so many people talking about how they objected to this. And in the end, people were happy with that solution.